welcome to GravCap Brewing. My name is Wrobel. I'm the head brewer here. We're going to go back there and we're going to brew a berry wheat ale. I'm adding the wheat into the hopper. It goes up the chute and it goes into the mash. And then I'm going to mash it for an hour, roughly. And we're going to convert the starch from this grain into sugar. This is the grist hydrator. The water's coming in from right here and right there and around. The grain's about to start coming through. And what it's doing is it's making sure I don't get like dough balls, like when you're mixing flour and water. You get little dough balls, so it's just making sure that all of the grain gets wet and incorporated into the mash. And we're doing about 120 gallons of water, and we're working with wheat, so wheat absorbs less water than barley, so I have to kind of account for that in the mashing process and add less water. I'm just making sure like the temp of water going in is the right temp, so I can hit my target mash temperature, it's called. So you want to hit like 153 is the standard, but you can go lower, you can go higher, and it affects the beer differently. You can, if you go lower, it'll be a little more drier. There'll be a little more fermentable sugars. If you go higher in temperature, it'll have a little residual sweetness. Everything in here gets covered in dust slowly because of all the grain and it's just from dumping it in there. We don't even mill the grain here. We legally can't have a miller here because of all the dust. You know, in like flour factories, there's a ton of flour in the air, and you light it or spark it, it'll blow up. So the same thing would happen here. That's why we have to have another company mill our grain for us. That's the same company that delivers our grain and malts it, so they have that, all of that already. All right, and now I have to check its pH, and then check the temp, adjust the temp. And then if I went too hot, I have to add amylase. All right, I have a soup ladle just for doing this. We'll go here. We're just seeing what the pH is at, and then I have to adjust it with some lactic acid. It's only 6.2 pH, and I want it like 5.6. So I have to add some acid. Needs another ounce. Alright, finally. 5.6. It'll keep creeping lower too as the mash goes on. And now I'm slowly opening up the bottom of the mash tun to get it here in the grant. And then I'm going to start vorlaughing, or recirculating, through this arm right here. So depending on how well I converted the sugar, or the starches into sugars, depends on how much I'm going to be collecting here. So if I converted really well, we're going to get about 7 barrels, which is 210 gallons. But if I didn't do such a great job, which I'm assuming I didn't, we're gonna go, because it wasn't hot enough, and it's wheat, so the water ratios are different for me. I don't know the numbers so well, but we're probably gonna get 5 barrels at the end of this. So enough to go through in a decent amount of time in the tasting room, but not so much where it just sits around, because you don't want that as a brewer. You don't want your beer sitting around for too long. It goes bad eventually, like 3-4 months, and it starts turning. Stouts and porters, on the other hand, it doesn't matter how long they're sitting there. You go and you try it, and it's like, wow, this is better than it was. I made a can of porter for my future mother-in-law, and I gave it to her in the middle of COVID, like back in 2019. She cracked it open just this December, and she's like, try it. And I tasted a sip of it, and I was like, wow, it's still good. It's kind of amazing. It's been like 2 years, like a year and a half. And I'm like, I'll try it. You know, what's the worst that could happen? Yeah, it was fine. It tasted fine. So that's one of my concerns, is beer spoilage. You know, you don't want to drink a bad beer. All right, so now I'm gonna start moving it into here. And this is called sparging when we're transferring the beer in it. Because there's not enough water in here to make a full batch of beer right now. I have to add water continuously on top of this as I'm transferring. So we're gonna start doing that now. At first I don't use the pumps, and then I have to, so this is just getting gravity fed right now, or it will be. There, you can hear it. And the first little bit's really starchy, so I just let that go. I actually want this open now. I gotta start adding the water on top of it now. I like to take a little piece of tape, I've been using the same piece, and just put it at the water line because I want to keep it there. And I'll adjust the water going in and into the mash, and I'll adjust the wort going into the boil kettle, like the different speeds to get the water level to be the same. Because when you're, this is called fly sparging. When you're fly sparging, you don't want too much water on the top of the grain, or else it'll push all the grain down, and you don't want the and you don't want too much wort to be collected or pushed through, because then all the grain will just settle. You want all the grain to just kind of float around as you're collecting it and putting it into the boil kettle. So I'm slowing down the water going into the mash. I'm going to want 5 barrels, let's say. That's 150 gallons. And then the grain's going to absorb, every 12 pounds absorbs a gallon. And that's 350 divided by 12. It's 30 plus 150. 180. I'm going for 180. Maybe less. We'll say 175. And then I'll stop collecting. And then that'll be, how much more do I have? If I want like a 5% beer, a 5.5, I use 350 pounds of barley, and I'll get 5.5. So more grain, and it's a diminishing return. So say I use 750 pounds of grain. I'm not gonna get, 10% because I use double. I'm only gonna get 7 to 6%. So if I use 750, I'll see about 7% ABV. And I'm turning on the heat for this now to try to get it to boil.
It starts to boil, how long will the process is that?
It's 1 hour exactly. Some beers take longer. So there's, I know there's 6 major reasons you boil wort, and I forget most of them, but the 3, one is sanitization, to sanitize it. The other is to remove dimethyl sulfide, DMS, which is a cream corn flavor in your beer. The other reason is to get more utilization out of your hops. So the longer you boil hops, the more bitter the beer is going to be. So if you want to use less hops, you boil longer. So you could do a 90-minute boil or a 120. I usually only do 60. There's like 2 beers I'll do a 90-minute boil, but that's it. Today we're doing a 60-minute boil. And I forget the other reasons to boil beer, but those are the reasons I boil beer. I know another, a wiser, older brewer would know the 6 major reasons. So I'm aiming for 180 gallons. There's a water flow meter right here. It's counting how fast the flow rate of water is going into this thing. It also measures how much water is in here. So as soon as this water flow meter tells me that it's at 180 gallons in there, I stop adding water. I turn off that pump, that noisy pump, and then I just leave it to collect in here. And that's just moving it around in a circle. So more of the water molecules will come in contact with the sides of this, because this is a steam-jacketed boil kettle. So it'll eventually get to boil. Pressurized steam. when we're done with this, done with the grain after making the beer, we put it into buckets, and then a farmer comes along and he'll pick it up and feed it to his animals. Yeah. And actually, all this grain is locally grown too, locally malted. It's from a malting company called Motor City Malt. They hooked up with local farmers, and so all this beer is from local grain too, which is pretty cool. I like that the most. It smells like beer. It smells like wort. I just turn that on and it kind of mixes all the grain up. I turn the rake on. Once the grain's all dry, it kind of loosens it up, helps the excess water flow so the grain's not as heavy. Yeah, brewing, some other brewers said it, but brewing is like 10% actually brewing and 90% cleaning. I'll just let this thing run for hours, just to eliminate some of the labor, speed it up. The common number I see with a lot of big breweries, Founders took 20 years. Shorts is the only one that took like 10 or less, but Founders took 20 years. Bell's took 20 years. Sam Adams took 20 years, and then they blow up. So it takes 20 years of being a good, consistent brewery before you actually get somewhere. And a lot of it is a lot of headache and heartache. So we're on year 3. We only got 17 more years. We have to wait until we're actually at a boil to add the hop. Yeah, these are all the hops I need right here. 8 ounces of Simcoe. That's all that's going into this batch. It's not a full batch, so I need less, and then it's not going to be a bitter beer. It's going to be a fruited beer. So I do this just to round it out. If I didn't, it'd be too sweet of a beer. 1 hour. 1 hour boil. 1 hop addition. There we are. That's it. Now we wait an hour. Transfer. I just turn on the whirlpool, let it get to about 210, 209. It's already 210. And then we're going to, once it stops boiling, I'm going to turn off this pump, and then all the hops are going to collect in the middle. After the whirlpool process, the 15-minute rest, they all just kind of congregate in the center of the tank. And that way, when I'm transferring, I'm not sucking it through the heat exchanger and having a ton of hot particles stuck. Hot particles and proteins just stuck in this heat exchanger because it's a very intricate piece. So that way there's no hops getting into the fermenter when we're done with this. You can't put yeast in hot wort, it'll kill the yeast. So we have to cool it down to 70 degrees or colder. And so you'll see it. It'll be 212, and then we'll get it all the way down to 60 degrees. Wow. Yeah, it's that efficient. It's it's a layer. It's like all these little plates, right? And on this side, beer goes through this way and then exits that way. So it's like doing this with the water and the beer. Water's on one side, beer's on the other. They don't touch. You're not mixing water in with the beer, but it touches through the heat. So it'll exchange the heat. And then the hot water goes back in this tank. And then the hot wort exits.
So how long would the beer sit in the fermenters for?
2 weeks, typically. A lager, a month. I do 5 weeks for a lager, just because I like to have a nice diacetyl rest on all my beer, actually. And so that's, yeah, 3 to 5 weeks. Most people will say 2 to 4, but I do 3 to 5. And let it clear up and, let it finish anything that's going on within the beer. Yeast needs oxygen to ferment. So I add oxygen in the line as it's getting transferred. Oxygenate the wort. And this is where it exchanges the heat. This is cold water, and it goes in through here, out the back, and then up this tube into the top. And beer is flowing. Gonna make sure air escapes. Yeah, you can see the difference in the without the oxygen, and then as soon as I turn it on, you can just see it aerating it. And then at the top of the sight glass over there as well. Because it's wintertime, it's so cold, it's able to get this wort down to 50 degrees.
Gallons of beer transferring right now?
150.
150 gallons, and how long of a process is that?
Depending on the speed of how fast I'm pumping it, can it be anywhere from like 40 minutes to, and we're going really fast right now because the water's so cold. It's only going to be like 15 minutes. This is a vacuum-packed brick of just solid dried yeast. Most breweries would rehydrate this. There's a whole bunch of science of why you should rehydrate your yeast. It's just easier if you add it like this. Saves time. It's expensive for yeast though. $61. So that's pretty cold. The bucket keeps air from going in this way, and because the yeast will be actively fermenting, it's going to be building up with pressure and CO2, so it needs somewhere to go. So we just let it go through this arm, in through the bucket of sanitized water, and that way it doesn't cause any spoilage or prevents spoilage. All right. It's all the stuff that I prevented from getting into the heat exchanger there. And in the fermentation. So this is like the first step of clarifying a beer. The yeast is gonna start turning the sugars and the fermentable sugars into alcohol, and it'll produce alcohol and CO2. And the CO2 will escape from the bubbler there, and then the alcohol will be just left in the beer for us to enjoy and get drunk. We just got done moving this beer in here, and it's gonna ferment. 3 weeks it'll be done, and then next we'll be transferring the turn to stone from that fermentation vessel into the Sprite tank. We just transferred the berry wheat ale into the Sprite tank. It's done carbonating. We're gonna keg some off now. I gotta wash out all of the quaternary sanitizer in the tube. Just flush with the beer. Make sure there's no yeast in the bottom of the bright tank. Let it out. And then we have CO2 coming in, and it's gonna be about 10 psi. And the keg's about 10 psi, so it's gonna slowly fill under the same pressure. It's been 3 weeks. We've transferred the berry wheat ale, and we've kegged it, and now it's on tap. I'm pouring the berry wheat ale. Come down to GravCap Brewing and give it a try.